I've got two pieces of legislation that I want to update you on, but I'm not going to do hardly any talking. I'm going to let the legislators themselves speak. If you're having a hard time hearing the video, just let me know and maybe I'll try to do something different to make it louder. But it's important to hear the legislators speak for themselves. What do they do in Columbia? What happens as they debate these bills that affect us every day? I only wish I had seen videos of Senator Nicholson in action. I'm sure it was something to behold. But some of the things I've seen are both inspiring and depressing. And we're going to see a couple of those. So again, we're going to see some emotional speeches. The first one is about the Compassionate Care Act. How many of you are familiar with what that entails? Just a few hands. This is about allowing medicinal marijuana in a very restrictive manner to be able to treat the disabilities, to treat pain, a very specific set of medical conditions. And you'll hear about it. Senator Sen Davis of Beaufort County has been championing this cause for 8 years. It almost passed last year, and then some finagling happened and it got shot. So this was the second or another chance for it to happen, and it doesn't look like it will. So Senator Sen Davis took to what they call the well to speak. And so I want to play for you a couple of minutes of his speech so you can see a legislator who's truly passionate about a bill and sometimes the frustration that boils over when years of hard work doesn't make it.
Senator from Beaufort.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, members. It's the first time this session I've risen on a point of personal interest, and this is going to be the first time this session that you've heard me talk about the Compassionate Care Act, the empowerment of doctors under very limited circumstances to authorize patient use of cannabis, subject to continual physician oversight, subject to being dispensed by pharmacists, limited to conditions for only which there's empirical evidence that there's a medicinal benefit that cannabis can provide to a patient who's suffering. But I'm going to speak about it today because we're approaching crossover deadline. And I had honestly thought, based on my discussions with my colleagues in the Senate, that we were going to get this bill over to the House this year, where it was last year, after passing 28-16, and then being ruled on the last day or last week of session as being out of order because it had a revenue-raising component to it, because it had a sales tax imposed to help cover the cost of the program. First time ever they've ever done that. We got punked by the House over there and got our wings clipped. This is the most conservative bill, and yet we can't take it up for debate. And some of the reasons that I've heard recently as to why we can't take it up for debate is that this work product, Senator from Lawrence, is not worthy of this Senate because it hasn't been vetted. 8 years worth of hearings, over a dozen subcommittee hearings of testimony, 3 weeks of Senate debate with amendments adopted, and this bill isn't ready for this Senate to debate because it hasn't been vetted. That was embarrassing. I'm sorry I didn't stand there for you, Chairman of Medical Affairs, when you were criticized for pulling it out of committee, a bill that we've already approved out of committee, and subjected you to the criticism from some of our colleagues that you did this Senate a disservice by sending up work product that wasn't worthy of the Senate. Okay? There are people who are suffering. And I sent to you, a lot of you, a text from someone you all know and love about what she's going through right now with her mother, who is dying of pancreatic cancer, who is in so much pain from chemotherapy, she had to be taken to the emergency room last night and put on opioids, which knocked her out completely, when we know that cannabis can be a therapeutic substitute for that increases quality of life. This is embarrassing that we can't do this. It's embarrassing to me. It really is. I can go through all the aspects of this bill that makes it conservative, but I think after 3 weeks worth of debate, robust debate in which I took up every reasonable amendment that was offered and incorporated, I don't need to repeat that to y'all. You know, throughout this process, there's physicians on the front end, there's pharmacists on the back end, there's regulation all throughout. You can't smoke it. You can't have it in certain forms. You can't appeal to children. You have to have independent labs. Every single state law that has passed this, I have borrowed from the best provisions to make this a bill we can be proud of, a bill that I would say is beyond precedent for having been vetted, and yet we have people in this chamber that say it hasn't been vetted. That's a lie. It's a lie, and it's not compassionate, and it's wrong. I've got to listen to the phone calls from people asking me what the hell has happened. I waited my turn. I hadn't talked about this. We took up CON repeal. We took up school choice. We take up China now. We're going to take up preemption. We're going to take up other things. I waited my turn because it was understood we were going to take this up because it passed 28-16 last year. A majority of the Republican caucus passed it last year. And the House clipped our wings on it and embarrassed our staff. They embarrassed me on the floor of this Senate when the majority leader stood up during the motion period and made a motion for special order. The opponents of this bill screamed no, so it got to a roll call. And then when it went to a roll call, 7 or 8 individuals who I worked with last year adopted their amendments last year, answered their questions last year, and they voted for this bill last year. They went ahead and flipped and voted it down. In the 15 years I've been in the Senate, I have never experienced that. Never. Never have. And it is not something that I'll ever do to another member. I would never do that. In fact, what I do is on subcommittees that I chair, and I'm the floor leader, even if I don't like that bill, I take it on as something I'm going to get passed. I'm going to get it passed, even if I have reservations, because that is what an honorable member does. I have not been treated honorably. The people of South Carolina have not been treated honorably. We are behaving in a way that's driven by fear and misimpressions and misinformation. We're going to be the 50th state to authorize this. And in the meantime, we have people who are taking opioids for things that they could have released from medical cannabis. We have individuals with neurological disorders. We have people that have Crohn's disease, people who have real maladies for which there is empirical, peer-reviewed science saying this can help. And we're telling doctors no. And I don't have an answer for all the people that are calling me saying, why couldn't you get this done? And I failed. I failed. You know what? I'm tempted to just go ahead and take my name off the bill, let somebody else be the primary sponsor of that, because maybe they can get it done where I can't. Because obviously after 9 years, you know what? The definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again with a different result. Maybe I'm not the person to lead this thing. Maybe somebody else should lead this thing. And I'm happy to yield to it because it's far more important that this get done and that doctors be allowed to do what doctors think is in a patient's best interest than me getting any credit for it. We had this.
Yeah, I've been following this. I visited a family in '96 whose daughter has been waiting for years for this type of treatment, who could be relieved of suffering right now from her seizures, and it's just not being allowed. And when you hear that type of speech, how could you not be persuaded and moved and made to think differently about a subject? But I think what's very frustrating to him and to many others is that the elected officials show up with a fixed set of ideas in their mind and are not movable. They cannot process new information or facts or hear arguments. They just sit there, let the words roll right over them. How hard of a heart do you have to hear that and not be moved and not be persuaded and then keep your stance and ignore all of the data information that came their way? So I wish Tom Davis the best. You can see he's on the verge of giving up himself if he thinks it would help it pass. And that just tells you a lot about his character. And by the way, Tom Davis is a Republican. Right? He's considered a moderate Republican, but Republican nonetheless.